Hello everyone, it's Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. Hope everyone is doing alright this morning. Let me check my volume, make sure it's relatively passable, decent, not blistering anyone's ears. I'm not gonna repeat the story, but I'm doing this. Let's just say I had a rough day. But fortunately, I have insurance. An emergency room has awesome payments. So, going back like a year ago when I first started this channel, one of the things I picked up on was it seems that Donald Trump's rhetoric on Iran was out of step with his rhetoric as a peacenik. Meaning his thing was, America first, America first. I want us out of, or at the very least, in some kind of relationship with Russia, but not with Iran. And he continued to attack the Iran deal. Now, I don't think a reality show host knows anything about politics per se, but I do think he can pick up on a crowd and pick up on certain themes in the demographic that he's working with. And I suspect that was one of the themes. Now, he gets in office, and even though Trump supporters, many of them are anti-war, part of the reason they voted for him, many of them, was because they didn't think he was going to start a nuclear war. But it looks like he's changing on that. It does look like he's trying to achieve his objectives with Russia in the face of scathing criticism about it. But Iran, it also seems like he's trying to achieve his objectives, those objectives being regime change. You don't bring John Bolton to whisper into your ear if you're not a goddamn maniac. And you don't bring in Pompeo to do the same if you're not trying to change those regimes. They are trying to get rid of the government in that country. And they're starting off using, A, getting rid of the JCPOA, the Iran deal, and B, upping sanctions. Now, the United States took his ball and went home, but it was the only one to take his ball and went home. So the rest of the international community still acknowledges that Iran is staying by the tenets of the deal. The one who broke the deal was the United States. That is very important to understand from the standpoint of the way that the rest of the world observes this. Now Donald Trump says he's willing to meet with Rouhani. Great. But beyond that point, it looks like he's ramping up a war. I've said that going back a year. And every step that he's taken into that makes it look more and more realistic that he's looking to instigate a war. Now, if you remember, Wesley Clark has made this point of saying that the United States is supposed to take down all of these nations in the Middle East and essentially revamp what the Middle East is. And we have, for the most part, done that. We got stuck in Syria because the plan didn't encounter or didn't include Russia intervening in this case. But they did. Iran has continued to be an oyster in this way. We toppled the Iranian government once before. Iran retoppled, or you could say toppled the government that the United States put in, this brutal dictator. But unfortunately, like many revolutions, something gets stuck. It's not quite right. It's not quite a normal expression in the way human beings will behave. This kind of aberrant behavior. You end up with a theocratic Shah or a theocrat running the country, regardless of who's running the country. Doesn't mean I want Donald Trump bombing it to hell. And I suspect that a lot of people who voted for Donald Trump doesn't want Donald Trump bombing that country to hell. But it is a hard case to make that he's hiring a lot of right-wingers around him. If those right-wingers, it's like saying, am I going to hire a right-winger on my channel to be my video person or editorial person? No, it's weird. It's a conflict of interest. Ultimately, his perspective is going to conflict with my perspective. I'm going to put somebody in that slot who's going to be somewhat like me. They're going to serve a role. They're going to serve a function. I suspect the same thing with Pompeo and the same thing with Bolton. You don't put Bolton in that spot unless you want what Bolton is going to espouse. Just fucking hysterical. Australian Broadcasting Company comes out and says they were told that Donald Trump could be ready to order a strike against Iran. Now, the reason they say this is because Iran is part of what they call the Five Eyes, this kind of thing of looking over the planet. And Australia is part of Five Eyes. And Australia can be crucial in giving, you could say, information, assisting the United States in this strike. Let's take a look at this. Senior figures in the Turnbull government have told Turnbull, Jesus Christ. Senior figures in the Turnbull government have told the ABC that they believe the United States is preparing to bomb Iran's nuclear facilities, perhaps as early as next month, and Australia is poised to help identify possible threats. Senior government figures say Australian defense facilities will likely play a role in the identifying possible targets. But another senior source in security emphasizes there is a difference between providing intelligence and active targeting. Yeah, it's a word difference. Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull says he has no reason to believe the United States is preparing for a confrontation. But he would say that, right? He would say that. It comes amid a tense saber rattling by the United States President Donald Trump and his Iranian counterpart Hassan Rouhani. The ABC has been told by Australian defense facilities. The Australian Broadcasting Corporation has been told Australian defense facilities will likely play a role in identifying targets in Iran, as would British intelligence agencies. But a senior security official emphasized that there is a big difference between providing accurate intelligence and analysis on Iran facilities and being part of a kinetic mission. I'm sorry, dude, there is no difference. You knew they were doing a mission. You knew they were getting that information from you to do a mission. You are complicit in that mission. I don't understand how you're trying to make this distinction as if your hands are clean. Your hands are not clean. Your hands are not clean. Developing a picture is very different to actually participating in a strike, the source said. Hope that helps you sleep at night. Providing intelligence and understanding as to what is happening on the ground so that the government and allied governments are fully informed to make decisions is different than active targeting. I'm glad you would make that case. I think that case is nonsense. You knew full well what was going to be done with that information. Somebody walks up to you and says, hey, have you seen Bob? Yeah, Bob is over at the corner house. He's at his mom's house. And then you find out Bob was shot. Now, if you knew that the guy had a gun, and if you knew the guy with the gun was going to see Bob because he was going to put a bullet in Bob, you can't say that you had nothing to do with Bob getting shot, seeing as you gave the guy information on where to go and find and shoot Bob in the face. We weren't part actively of that. That wasn't us. We wasn't actively engaged. There's a difference between active engagement. Yeah, okay, whatever. Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull said this morning he had no reason to believe the United States was preparing for a military confrontation. President Trump has made his views very clear to the whole world, but this story has not been benefited from consultation with me, the foreign minister, defense minister, or the chief of defense force, he said. I suspect because they know you wouldn't tell the truth about it. You were a canned response. This is RT. Is Trump planning to strike Iran next month? Here's what you need to know. There's certain details in this part that I like, so I'm going to skip to this part. Meaning, essentially, the point that they're making is, up to this point, Australian Broadcasting Corporation said they were tipped off that Trump was planning to attack next month, and Australia was going to be used to identify targets, essentially intelligence. Australian leaders say, whoa, we know nothing about that. We did not agree to a strike. Yeah. We didn't agree to a strike. We know nothing about this. If you remember, I can play you a conversation where Mattis was asked just a few days before they attacked Syria. Are you going to attack Syria? Mattis says, we have no plans of doing that. Of course they have plans of attacking Syria. And you would have to be in a head in the ground to not know that Donald Trump has been ramping up his attacks on Iran. I mean, come on. You don't pull the treaty if you're okay with Iran. We know that Donald Trump unilaterally pulled the United States out of the Iranian nuclear accord. He's trying to make this point of saying, look, it sounds far-fetched that the United States is going to attack Iran. I don't think it sounds far-fetched at all. I think it sounds like what Donald Trump is doing and the people he's putting in offices and the rhetoric that he's using to try to justify what he would consider to be an attack, or what will be an attack, regardless of how he considers it. But he's just making this point of, I know this seems far-fetched, but here's reason to believe that something is wrong here, and that this could be leading up to a larger conflict. We know that Donald Trump unilaterally pulled the United States out of the Iranian nuclear accord, also known as a Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, in May of this year. We know that in doing so, he warned all countries to stop buying Iranian oil by November 4th, this year, re-implementing the sanctions that the JCPOA was supposed to have lifted off of Iran's shoulders. We know that there is little Europe can do to bypass these sanctions to maintain its economic relationship with Tehran, even if they tried. Now, the reason is because of the trade disparities with the United States. You get across this idea of how much of a vassal state Europe is in comparison to the United States. The United States unilaterally pulled themselves out of a deal, one country, out of six? And in unilaterally pulling themselves out the deal nearly crashes just by virtue of one country pulling itself out. Because Europe cannot meet the trade balance that the United States is going to bring. And not just that, the United States has said it's going to put sanctions on European companies that do business with Iran, meaning those companies are likely just going to, on their own volition, not do business with Iran because it's going to hurt their business model to be sanctioned by the United States. It doesn't matter that the European countries are standing beside it. The companies themselves, the private enterprises themselves, will make decisions that's in their best interest, and in their best interest is we want to maintain access to the United States market. That's his point. Let's see. We know that in response to these looming sanctions, Tehran has threatened to block the Strait of Hormuz, through which 30 to 35% of the world's maritime oil trade passes. We know that Iran is technically within its right to do so, and considering even a partial closure would be enough to rattle the global financial markets. This threat should not be taken lightly, especially as desperation appears to plague Iran's economic situation. Aside from developing its own cryptocurrency, there is little hope for Iran to bypass Washington's economic warfare without threatening the United States or its allies in the process. Do you guys remember, as if you guys were around, World War II, when Japan attacked the United States? Do you remember why Japan attacked the United States? Nobody remembers that part. Everybody remembers just the attack. A day which will live in infamy. FDR giving this thunderous speech after saying he was going to keep the United States out of the war and quasi keeping it out of the war, but Japan allowed the pretext for them to get into the war. The United States was putting sanctions on Iran, on Japan, vicious economic sanctions. And Japan was being, to some degree, starved of commerce. In an odd case, Japan attacked. This is somewhat similar here. And there are even documents that kind of make this point that the United States knew Japan's recourse was likely going to be some level of attack. It's like they were being starved. They, in their mind, the situation was we need to do something. We can't just stand here and be starved. Is this a similar strategy to what's taking place with Iran? I should have pulled that document up. I have it in one of my other videos. I need to find it. But FDR knew that they were being starved. And the defense strategy in the United States knew as they were being starved, they may strike back. It's the same thing taking place here. Iran has made a threat to close the Strait of Hormuz. If I'm not mistaken, they own that strait. It can close it. But who cares about international law? 30% of the oil goes through that strait. The United States has already said they will send their warships over in order to defend and keep that strait open. History doesn't repeat itself, but it damn sure rhymes. Damn sure rhymes. Let's take a look. Let's keep going. According to CNN, the United States is now considering the military options available to them to keep these vital waterways open, most likely using the proxy forces to do its bidding on its behalf, such as Saudi forces. Even Iran's ally, China, has essentially warned against Iran's pending closure of the passage, even as it has carried out joint naval exercises near the strait with Iran in the past. Essentially, look, we've helped you out with this, but don't do this. Don't do this. We're still buying your oil. Russia's still buying your oil. Don't close that strait. You're precipitating something that's a little bit more than we want to deal with. We also know that Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Major General Mohammed Hossein Bagheri has warned Washington's economic offensive is only a prelude to a real goal of the Trump administration being a military attack. We know that a military attack is most likely on the table in some way, shape, or form, as Donald Trump appointed infamous madman John Bolton as his national security advisor, who promised a regime change that would take place in Iran by the end of this year. I showed you that video many times. This is the same madman that wrote an op-ed in the New York Times entitled, "To Stop Iran, Bomb Iran." To stop Iran's bomb Iran. John Bolton is a lunatic. We also know that the United States is planning to revive the so-called Arab NATO in an effort to directly confront Iran, with the White House openly confirming that it has been devising some concept of the alliance with its regional partners now, and have been for several months. Currently known as the Middle East Strategic Alliance, MESA, its entire purpose appears to be to buffer against Iranian aggression, terrorism, extremism, according to spokesman for the White House. That always amazes me. Like, who has Iran invaded? Like, honestly, who has Iran invaded? We've invaded multiple countries. We've destroyed multiple countries. Israel has a nuclear bomb. Israel has been doing strikes all over the place. These are some violent, bloodthirsty nations. It's just a little weird to me that a violent, bloodthirsty nation causes somebody a terrorist or something. That always amazes me. Terrorism is a relative term. It's one of those things that depends upon the person who's saying it. Your enemy is always a terrorist, depending upon what your power structure. Now, I'm saying it's words that can easily be conflated, regardless of what you want to call them. Ultimately, there's somebody who in opposition to what you're trying to do. Iranian aggression, terrorism, extremism, that trips me out. It completely ignores what we've done around the world. It really does. It pretends as if... I'm just always amazed that the propaganda that takes place in the way that we word things in this country. That's all. It's not that I think other countries are somehow magically different. It's just aggravating when... Look, I don't like this idea of a theocratic rule, so don't misunderstand me. Nor do I like this idea... That woman, I showed the video of that woman doing the dance. She was popping and locking, and they arrested her for popping and locking. She was a damn good popping and locker. I don't like that they do that. I don't like that they have a theocratic rule. Don't like it one iota. And it is for Iranian people to own that level of self-determination and to choose their government. I don't want to be a part of it. It's none of my business. Meaning, I don't want to invest military assets. I don't want to set that country on fire, just like we've set the other countries on fire. I want to be out of the Middle East. Let people live their lives. Fucking Scrooge McDuck shitting on people all over the world, while at the same token saying that somehow people are angry at us. They're angry at us. We're a beacon of truth and justice, and they're angry at us. Why? Why are they angry at you? Tying these developments together in an incident that took place relatively quiet last Thursday, which saw a huge tanker with a shipment of oil from Saudi Arabia bound for Egypt damaged by a missile attack from the northern Bab el-Mundeb Strait in the Red Sea, which was launched by Yemen's Houthi. Western media, in tandem with Saudi and Israeli media, have labeled the Houthi as an inter-Iranian proxy. Yes, they have. However, as I've pointed out consistently over the last years, there is actual, very little concrete proof of such an existence. Yes, this took place last year also, if I'm not mistaken, with the United States coming out, acting as if an attack that took place by Houthis was a proxy for Iran, and that this was somehow some kind of pretext for some kind of strike on Iran. It was so bizarre. It was so weird. Look out for them when they do that. Trump itself was essentially screaming at Iran for something that the Houthis did, acting as if these things were almost one and the same. They don't know that. This is political jargon in order to come up with a pretext to attack Iran. Not to mention, it wasn't even against us. It was against Saudi Arabia. A war with Iran might sound far-fetched and may indeed lead to some unfathomable consequences, but the groundwork for such a confrontation is being laid right before our very eyes, and the corporate media is almost all but completely silent. That's true. Whether or not a missile strike or an Iran is looming in the horizon, Washington's war with Iran has already begun in more ways than one, and appears to be set to escalate until the United States can achieve the collapse of the Iranian regime through direct or indirect means. And that is true. Unfortunately, that is true. I'm saying, is there anything else with this? Right here. Here's another one. We know that if the United States cannot get to Iran directly, it has devised a plan to scale back its influence through the Middle East. We know that the United States has taken over 1/3 of Syria, including some of the most strategic areas, as a means of countering Iran's expansion in the region. We also know that I don't know if that number is true, by the way, the 1/3. Syrian government has been taking this stuff back, so I'm not sure what that number is. We also know that this has been the goal all along, underpinning Washington's involvement in the country under the disingenuous guise of fighting ISIS. According to CENTCOM Commander United States General Joseph Vodo, the United States military base in Al-Taf, Syria, provides opportunities for the United States to indirectly influence Iranian activities by pursuit of our ongoing operations. It's like we're in this area. We can now do stuff now that we're militarily occupying this area. Look, if you're a Trump supporter, please tell me you can acknowledge that this is not good. And H.A. Goodman has come out saying that, oh, Donald Trump is not going to attack Iran. And this was like last year. And I said, dude, you're insane. You don't hire John Bolton if you're not planning on something. In the same way, one idiot Republican, George Bush, attacked Iraq and killed 1 million people. What is Donald Trump planning? And not just what is Donald Trump planning. What is Donald Trump planning in the context of a world that, A, has seen the United States destroy Iraq, has seen the consequences of that destruction, meaning Europe has seen the consequences of that destruction. And Europe has not signed on to what the United States is doing. In fact, not just not signed on, they've stayed with the deal. Yes, the private interests have gone because they're profit driven. They're greedy. They want to make as much money as they can. But from the standpoint of the governments themselves have not abandoned that agreement or that treaty. This is a different world. It will be catastrophic if Donald Trump attacks Iran. And the fact is, it is hard where we are to see all the ramifications of him doing that. Would other countries intervene? And not just would other countries intervene. Would this end up being this? Look, I've made this point before, that what the Middle East looks like now, it looks like a standoff to some degree. That there are certain countries that have aligned themselves, like the European Union or NATO, the United States on one side, and then you have the rest of the world on the other. That's what it looks like. Or the rest of what you consider to be regional major powers. China, Russia, Iran, Syria. Syria is a fractured power at this point, but still it's a country. Even to some degree, North Korea and maybe even Turkey. You have these large blocks of countries that are on unknowable sides. And if a conflict breaks out, it is hard to know what are going to be the ramifications of that conflict. If you're a Trump supporter, please tell me that you're not okay with this. Donald Trump is potentially talking about attacking Iran. Wesley Walker, switch to overnights. Glad I can still catch you live. Upped my patron just in case, man. Oh, thank you, Wesley. Well, I didn't switch to nights totally. It just so happens I was in the hospital earlier today. Earlier tonight. And incapacitated most of the day from the thing that put me in the hospital later tonight. I ate something I had no business eating. I have a medical procedure. It gets worse after the procedure. And I am doubled over for most of the day and can't function. And I know last time this happened, it took days, like 5 or more days for it to recover. And so I dragged myself to the hospital. I got my wife to take me to the hospital. They doped me up with Dilaudid and Finnegan cocktail. That's my favorite cocktail. And I'm saying favorite cocktail when I'm in the hospital. When I'm in pain, there's a certain drug that works better than the other ones. Dilaudid works better for me for pain. And they asked me if I wanted to be on my way. I said yes. We have dogs at home that need to be tended to. And so they wrote me a prescription for pain meds, doped me up, and sent me out. And I just need to wait for the stuff to pass. So right now, it just hurts. But it's fine. So yeah, we're gearing up for something to go down over there. That's what it looks like. But again, I've been saying this for the past year, that that's what it was looking like. Because that's what it looks like. I don't think you bring John Bolton. It's like, if you have a guy that whatever you ask that guy, he would say, it's raining outside. Do you hire that guy to do your weather? Unless you wanted that guy to say, it's raining outside. Like, it's one of those things where you hire John Bolton when you have a very specific point of view that you want. John Bolton is always going to give you that one same point of view. Somebody needs to die. Somebody needs to be killed. No, I'm not going to fight that war. But yeah, you should send somebody else's kid over there to bleed. So if you bring that guy onto your staff, there's a problem. When Rand Paul confirmed Pompeo, knowing goddamn well that Pompeo would be for this kind of intervention in Iran, that's a problem. That's a problem. My only point here is, don't be so head in the ass of Trump that you can't see the bad shit that he's doing that's breaking your own rule set. And many of you had that rule set that you were voting for him because he was anti-war. And now look at him potentially propagating a war. Sanctions alone could propagate a war, by the way, with this idea of trying to get Iran provoked. And then you can point to Iran and say, hey, see, look at what Iran did. Missing the point that the sanctions themselves had a certain amount of bite that kind of compels behavior. And compels may be too strong, but they're going to have to respond in some way. Look at Japan. I still use Japan because I think Japan is a great example. During the time where the sanctions were implemented in Japan, it was wreaking havoc on the Japanese economy. The attack, you can make an argument, was to some degree desperation. But I'm just saying. And look, this is no sympathy for the Japanese. They committed atrocities in China. So, it's not oh, whoa, the Japanese soldiers. It's not that. I'm just trying to show this difference or this comparative difference in history of this is what happened then, and this is what they did when they were encountering this, and this is what happens now, and are they going to do something similar, like closing the Strait of Hormuz, in retaliatory response? Stay tuned. Stay tuned. Balthazar, John Bowden, Lord of the Black Site and Warden of the Swamp. Warden of the Swamp is an understatement. Tabitha Enriquez, Jamal Orion is number 7 on Wesley Clark's list, the last one. Yeah. Well, they've broken Syria, but the problem is they didn't end Syria. Syria still exists. It's still intact. And I don't think they believed that Russia was going to intervene in that conflict. Russia did intervene because I think Russia understood that at the end of the day, their sovereignty is only in place with the assistance of other nations nearby. And if they were able to get these nations and put Western nations in all around the border of Russia, that encirclement would to some degree be complete. It couldn't be allowed. No country would allow it. Imagine if that was the United States. Somebody was building up on the Mexican border. Would they allow it? We were willing to go to nuclear war over Cuba. You're putting missiles in Cuba to strike us. We were willing to go to nuclear war over Cuba. By the same token, we have been circling Russia with nuclear armaments. Right here. Let's see if I can find a picture. Look at this. No, this is not a good picture. Let's see, maybe just a better one. But I'm trying to show the NATO encirclement of Russia because it's, yeah, like this right here. Ukraine. There are NATO nations coming all around here. Bar station, BMD station, BMD radar. True presence, increased true presence. They're surrounding China and Russia. Ukraine was because Ukraine started to move to the west. Now understand, they weren't supposed to move at all when the Soviet Union imploded. And Gorbachev, I don't know if anybody has heard any lectures from Gorbachev. It's fascinating lectures. Gorbachev has become somewhat bitter in the way that the United States has acted after the collapse of the Soviet Union. He's somewhat reviled, or reviled is not the right word. He's somewhat hated in his own country, while at the same token loved in other countries. That's an interesting dynamic. Like, I think I would feel some kind of way if African Americans thought I somehow dropped the ball. You know what I mean? And to some degree, that's what other people thought, oh, wow, this guy's awesome. It would be a weird dichotomy between those things. If I'm going to get respect from anybody, I want respect for everybody. But especially my own. I don't want to feel like I betrayed the people who came before me in this. The other part is he's come around to a more Putin-esque view of the world. But he came around that way not because of just shits and giggles. He came around that way because he felt like I tried to open us up and I tried to reach out to the West, and you slapped my hand. And not just slapped my hand, made me look bad by expanding NATO even further, meaning making me look delusional and naive in what I wanted to accomplish. And that's essentially what happened. Reagan got out of office. Bush gave him certain assurances. Bush essentially went back on it. Clinton went back on it. Obama went back on it. Everybody went back on the promises. And at this point, nobody even remembers that the promises were made in the first place. But yeah, Russia's the threat. Russia is the threat. All right, I'm going to end this. I'm going to end this. It's getting late. And I want to get a little bit of sleep in. That woman who's doing the hula hoop, or not hula hoop, who's doing the dancing, that's Iran. Like, she is Iran. The leaders, the Khomeini, Ayatollah, those guys. Yes, you have a small segment of that run the country. But you're talking about just a very few tiny number of people. Iran is that woman who was doing the hula dance, who wanted to be free and dance, in this kind of quasi-Arabic rap way. The vendor on the street who's just trying to sell their goods to make their ends meet. The mom who cares about her kid. The kid who cares about their mom. They're just human beings. They're like you and your family. Think about your family. Think about your aunt. Do you love your aunt, or your mom, or your sister, or your cousin? There's somebody in your family that you either like or love. Your school teacher, your brother. I understand there's a religious overlay on the country, but at the end of the day, they're still just human beings. And they live their lives accordingly, just like we live our lives. They have a different cultural framework, just like we have a different cultural framework. People ask, why don't they change their governments? Why don't you change your government? Why don't you change your government? My point is, they're just human beings. If they came and indiscriminately killed Americans, I suppose you would feel some kind of way about it. I don't understand why people don't feel the same way about indiscriminately killing them. Balthazar, I made you a tutorial vid, an addendum on OBS Streamlabs and YouTube. I tweeted the videos to you yesterday. Check them out when you have a second. Dude, direct message me. Just send me the direct message. Balthazar, Ayatollah Yuso. Ayatollah Yuso. That's funny. Heathen savages, Jamal. Aren't they heathen savages? No, they're not. So I went to Egypt. I've been in Jordan. They're just human beings. They're just human beings. I had certain things that were driven in me from my perspective on of terrorism and everything else in the country. And I was one of those people who would be like, Arabs are terrorists or that type of stuff. And then you go to the country, you're like, oh, they're just human beings just like me. And you start realizing people are people. Like, I wasn't that bad. Like, Arabs are terrorists. I wasn't that bad. But it did have this idea of when bombings take place or something to that effect, it's terrorism. And it didn't have a framework by which to add that terrorism in. So it made it look as if terrorism was just for the sake of terrorism because they hated America. The more you start looking into it, you more start reading, you're like, oh, there's a context. That's an important context that's completely missed. Part of that context is that people are human beings. They're people. And they live their lives just like you live your life. Just like you have a school teacher that you love, there's somebody there that has a school teacher that they love. Their society is different. Their culture is different. But ultimately, they're human beings that are poured into a culture, like water into a glass. The different shapes of the glass, but the water itself is the same. But the water itself is the same. Yeah. It just bugs the shit out of me, that's all. I've been over to those countries. And yeah, I don't necessarily know how they reconcile Islam with scamming people out of their money. But I suppose they do it just like Christians reconcile sex outside of wedlock. They're human beings living their life, and they're going to be some things they can abide by, some things they can't. They can form their religion to who they are. If you put them in a hostile, difficult, rough position, you're not going to get beautiful things out. You're going to get people who are maniacs. I suspect ISIS is to some degree an outgrowth of what took place in Iraq and what took place in that particular part of the world under George Bush that nobody went to jail for. Look, my only point is they're human beings. They're human beings. All right, I'm going to end this. Winkle the Bernie Bro bookmarked. Thanks, Balthazar. That should really help me out. Very cool. Balthazar, I'm gonna check that video out, my man. I appreciate it. Jamal doesn't sleep. He waits for news. Just like Batman, the man on the wall waiting for news to come take place. No, today was just a long day. So I figured I'd just get some of this out the way now, then do the rest tomorrow before I have to get more labs. So, all right, guys. I will end this here. Not good news if you're a Trump supporter. Not good news if you're a Trump supporter. At least I don't think it is. If I understand many of them right, they tend to be interventionists or non-interventionists. So will they just ignore this? Will they pretend this doesn't exist? What will they do about this bit of information? Inquiring minds want to know. All right, guys. If you enjoyed the content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe, and of course, you can always support the Patreon. Thanks, guys.